Let's start a two-part conversation with Policy Analyst and CEO at Cowry Asset Management, Chukwu. He joins me now on the program. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Boston. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We hope you've had a very profitable day. Let's get started, Johnson, and talk about the privatization program. Do you think the privatization of some of these government property, the TBS, the Abuja Stadium, the Geregu power plant, do you think they are enough to support government finances?
Well, what I would say is that to some extent they will go to cushion the deficit that the government is actually facing in terms of budgetary position. But trying to raise about 434 billion naira will be a tip of the iceberg. I mean, will be a drop in the ocean given the level of budget deficit that the country is actually facing today. If you just catch your mind back to last year, where the budget deficit was about 4 trillion naira, and that was a normal year. This year, we are facing a major decline in government revenues. So you should expect a budget deficit of about 6 trillion, more than 6 trillion naira. A 400 billion naira revenue from the privatization of the power sector or the power generation companies will, to some extent, cushion the deficit or moderate the deficit, but it won't solve the problem.
So when we look at the funding options, the government is looking for money left, right, and center. This is not the first time. The government has been talking about this privatization of some assets or sale of some assets over the last 1-2 years or so. We haven't really seen anything really concrete being done. So what further reforms would you like to see, Johnson, in the MDAs as we're looking to see the government cut public and civil sector wages and other efficiencies that we need to bring into the system?
Well, Boston, I think the first thing that we should start with is to harmonize or rationalize some of the overlapping ministry agencies and departments. Beyond the issue of making government-owned enterprises or state-owned enterprises to be commercially viable, or by either selling them to private sector or commercializing them, the first thing we should focus on is eliminating the overlapping ministry agencies and departments. We have a lot of duplications that the cost of those duplications are so severe in terms of burdening the national treasury. Again, you have dead institutions, dead state government, state-owned enterprises that government continue to pay salaries and wages of those employees. If an organization has become moribund, why would you have a huge wage bill on those organizations and then that will continue to burden the national treasury? So the first thing first, eliminate the overlapping ministrations and departments. Two, before you now refocus on the issue of making commercially viable those state-owned enterprises. And unfortunately for us, we don't have a good history of privatizing companies. Of the companies that we have privatized since the beginning of the privatization process, more than 37 billion of them are still moribund. So you find out that we really don't have so much of great news in privatizing companies. We need to also address why did the privatizations in the past fail? What went wrong? Was it in terms of technical competence of those who privatized them, or in terms of people they were sold to, were there political interference that led to companies being sold to those who lack the capacity to manage them?
Yeah, the government did privatization. I'm sure you remember very well when it was the TCPC, which First Bank, I'm sure, Union Bank and a few others were part of AfriBank, the former AfriBank, and others were there under the late Dr. Zayed. So that was in the financial services industry. But when we talk about the oil and gas asset, we're talking about real estate assets and all of that. We haven't really seen this being a game changer. So the Ghanaian government announced last week they're taking 18 state-owned enterprises, 18, to the stock exchange in Accra. Should Nigeria use the same approach via the stock exchange to do this current one, rather than just selling them off and just collecting the money cash up front?
Interestingly, our situation is completely different at variance with what we have in Ghana. In Ghana, the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises, are relatively well run. Many of them are profitable. There is minimal political interference in their management. The Nigerian case is completely different. All the state-run enterprises are waste pipes or leakage pipes to the national treasury. I'm not aware of any state-run enterprise that is subject to proper accounting record keeping, that you can say is reporting profits year in, year out. The only exception we have, which is not even run by the state, is LNG. And because of the structure of LNG ownership, where the private sector is actually the operators, and the government just an equity stakeholder. That's the only one that you say is running well. But our experience with managing government enterprise, private or sector-oriented enterprise by the government has not been very pleasant. So I do not think we have the same history as Ghana as to say, okay, let's get these companies listed on the exchange. I'm sure if you have them listed, Nigerians are not going to buy them.
May I respectfully disagree with you? Look at the TBS, for example, the Tafawa Balewa Square, which is a massive expanse of land with real concrete structure where we got independence in 1960. This is a prime real estate, Johnson. Don't tell me you don't know about that. This is worth billions of naira. So if you take this to the stock exchange, whether as a real estate investment trust or what you call a REIT or whatever, don't tell me that's not good money.
Okay, I'm going to tell you something, Bosin, which I'm happy that Nigerians are listening to. You know, organizations succeed or fail as a result of the quality of leadership they have. We've had instances, multiple examples, where government enterprises are superintended by political appointees who had no competence to run them. If you have an institution like TBS, Tafawa Balewa Square, listed on the exchange, and you still have a board composed of largely public sector appointed political jobbers, let me use that word without due respect to the politicians. What will you have? You're going to have a mediocre administration, and you'll find out that those who have invested in that company will lose their money. And that's the story we have consistently with government, the Nigerian government managing enterprises. And we've not seen many exceptions to this rule. And I beg to see an exception, and I hope that will be proved wrong sooner than later. But the reality is that we've not seen the Nigerian government run organizations successfully. So even if you have that listed, you know the story. The banks, you just mentioned the banks. We knew what the banks were before the private sector. They were sold to the private sector operators. Remember the stories that come with your math. These banks refuse to innovate. We are manned by people who are appointed by the government officials or political representatives of those in power. And they were not selected based on their professional competencies. We have 1,001 cases all over the country.
So one question I'm going to ask you when we come back after the break is about the BPE. Do we need to restructure the BPE, or do we need another agency entirely to actually make Nigerian enterprises, state-owned enterprises, very viable? Let's continue after the break, everyone. Stand by. We'll be right back. Let's talk about the privatization. We talked about that earlier. My question before we went on break, what should we do with the BPE? In Ghana, they have a separate enterprise that not just midwife the companies, the SOEs, but make sure that they are good and well run. Do you think we need a similar agency in Nigeria?
Bosin, the problem is not the agency, it's the political environment under which the agency functions. If you look back at the BPE, we've seen different the BPE under different presidencies. And you remember the BPE reports is under the presidency. So the free hand with the president gives the DG of BPE, as well as the political support, are critical for you to have an independent and effective body of public enterprises. So it's not just a matter of changing the BPE or actually bringing another agency to do similar jobs or to support what the BPE is doing. Some of the challenges we have in the past is that, one, we saw political interference in determining the winners of some of these assets that were sold. Two, the BPE did not have the political strength or will to enforce post-privatization agreements, particularly some of the performance standards that were imposed on those privatized companies that the new management ought to have kept, and if they failed to keep it, could lead to revocation of the privatization process. Those things we are not adhered to, probably because the beneficiaries of the privatization had a lot of political leverage, and therefore the directors or the management of the BPE had no influence over them. So we need to address those. The key thing is that the BPE coming under presidency must be given all the powers that the president required to do their job. Just to cast your mind back to when we privatized, when we sold the telephone licenses. NCC had so much influence. If you recall, there was a bid that was not paid on time, and the head of the NCC had the capacity to enforce the terms of that privatization process or that licensing process. That if your money was not received in our offshore account by so and so time that there was no going back, and the money you paid in advance was forfeited. If he wasn't given that authority by the then President Olusegun Obasanjo, I don't think we would have seen the quality of the telecommunications that we have today, because
I agree with you.
FCC had the power to enforce the rules. So that is what is lacking.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. That was about 100 million. Then I think that the bank almost went under during that the period, because the IRLL company, whatever. So that's a whole about history. We should just leave that for today. Let's talk about inflation. And you know why this inflation story is very, very important, is because food inflation is rising, headline inflation is rising. But when you look at some of the stories or tweets that we're seeing on the social media about what is happening in some of Nigeria's agricultural food belt, then you begin to worry. This is what the BBC Hausa reports, that bandits in Zamfara State have stipulated harvest fees to few farmers that managed to cultivate. The farmers had to pay the gangs to access their farms at the beginning of the season, and now they are denied harvesting until they pay between 300,000 and 900,000 per village.
I'm happy you brought up this, because when you look at the inflation figure that we have today of 14.23%, an increase of 0.52% compared to what it was last year, which was 13.71%. The major driver is food inflation, which increased from 16.66% to 17.38%, as you have actually shown on screen. The key factor is that the major food base of the country are not able to either produce the food or get the foods to the market. You just pointed out the case of Zamfara. This is just a microcosm of what is happening in the entire northern part of the country. And we know they not supply all the food we eat, or virtually all the food we eat. The Northeast had been on lockdown, near lockdown, for the past couple of years. Food production in the Northeast has actually, most of them have been displaced and living in IDP camps. Then you now have the North Central has also been dealing with the issue of farmer-settler headers disputes or crisis. And now the crisis has moved to the Northwest. You just pointed out what's happening in Zamfara State. It's also happening similar to happening in Sokoto State, Katsina State.
Johnson, just quickly, we're going to put up another tweet very quickly to look at what some other folks tweeted about a similar situation. Say government got local information that isn't just Zamfara State, but another village in Cowry in Kaduna also paid 1 million naira to harvest their crops. We have no way of independently verifying these figures, by the way. But this is what we're getting on social media. The gang came back, kidnapped some of the farmers, and demanded more ransom. Parts of Kaduna also pay, do we have a government? So this has folks tweeting, Bulama Bukati, with our Twitter handle, saying, gang came back, kidnapped farmers, asking for ransom, demanded more money, and now they are not able to harvest or even cultivate the land. This is criminal enterprise at its best.
Yes, because we have watched consistently and the collapse of security around the country. The security situation has become a major challenge. I remember when I used to go to Gusau, Zamfara State, we could leave Gusau by 7 p.m. and drive back to Kano. You dare not do that. I have a friend who lives in Kano. His son works in Sokoto. He dare not allow his son to drive from Kano to Sokoto. The son had to fly to Abuja, to fly now from Abuja to Sokoto, when he could have driven from Kano to Sokoto. That's how bad the situation has gotten to. And it's also really manifesting in the standard of living of Nigeria, because if people can't get the food at reasonable prices, what do you see will happen? We're seeing a erosion in our standard of living. We're seeing a situation whereby, as inflation is going up, you find out your purchasing power, the purchasing power of your income is declining. And the government needs to do something quickly about the issue of insecurity around the country. It's not just in the northern part of the country. I mean, unfortunately, even Lagos, that used to be an oasis of security, is beginning to degenerate. We heard of case of armed robbery in Aja earlier in the week, and last week. And we are hearing people. Yesterday, I got the report that a vehicle was stolen on Admiralty Way in Lekki Phase 1. These are places that you thought we are no-go area for criminals. So if we allow the country to be taken over by criminals, then you can be rest assured that we are going into a state of anarchy. And that's what we are seeing in the northern part of the country, which is manifesting in food inflation that has also driven up inflation to a four-year high of 14.23%.
Johnson Chukwu, thank you so much. Policy Analyst and the CEO of Cowry Asset Management. Do have a very great evening.